So, Prince William has essentially executed a silent power shift inside Buckingham Palace. And his opening move is to methodically sideline Queen Camilla from royal operations, following a concealed luxury yacht scandal that completely unraveled. And the most surprising element isn't even the yacht itself. It's that the whole situation came undone because of a routine ship registry update that virtually no one ever reads. We're talking about the kind of maritime document that exists purely for insurance compliance. And it ended up setting off a chain reaction that's currently reshaping the British monarchy in real time. That's where this story genuinely begins, and honestly, the further you dig into the timeline, the more the official explanations simply collapse under their own weight. Before we go any further, if you're new here at Crown Watch, hit subscribe so you stay up to date as this story continues to unfold. Alright, let's walk through it. The trip that was never meant to surface happened in late July 2025. While William and Kate were completing back-to-back public appearances throughout the UK, visiting a children's hospice in Birmingham, attending a veteran ceremony near Edinburgh, Camilla was aboard a super yacht anchored off the southern French coast. This was not a royal vessel. It wasn't chartered by the Crown, with a formal staff manifest and a court circular entry. It was a private super yacht, registered in Malta called the Esperanza 3, owned through a Luxembourg holding company, and belonging to a Switzerland-based financier, whose name appeared nowhere in Camilla's official schedule, her public diary, or any palace press release issued throughout that entire summer. No public announcement was made, no royal correspondence received so much as a briefing, and even the palace press office, which routinely logs nearly every significant movement of senior working royals, had absolutely zero record of this trip. That alone says everything. This wasn't a clerical oversight. This was deliberately kept hidden. The yacht's owner has no criminal record and has never faced charges from authorities. But over the last decade, his name has come up repeatedly in European lobbying disclosures. His company holds active interests in land development, agricultural policy, and heritage property legislation, areas that are uncomfortably close to the kinds of decisions that royal patronages and crown estate management can shape. He is precisely the type of individual the royal family was supposed to distance itself from following the Prince Andrew scandals. And here's where it deteriorates further. Camilla had been on his boat before. That detail emerged later, and we'll return to it. But for now, let's focus on this particular trip in late July, which ran for 5 days. The guest list included a Conservative Party donor with live property planning applications in the West Country. It also featured a European media executive whose company holds broadcasting contracts with businesses that carry royal endorsements, and there were at least 2 individuals whose names appeared in leaked files from a 2023 lobbying investigation in Brussels. None of these guests were present in any official capacity. None of them were on the public record. The story didn't surface through a major investigative exposé or an anonymous tip. It emerged through a routine ship registry update, the sort of standard maritime filing that almost nobody reads unless they work in the industry. The document placed the vessel at a specific marina on a specific date. A royal researcher then cross-referenced this filing with a photograph posted by one of the guests, a background shot from a dinner on deck, uploaded briefly to a private Instagram account before the user deleted it. But someone had already saved the image. Within 48 hours, 2 British journalists and a German media outlet had received the photo. The German organization had spent years mapping European lobbying networks, so they recognized immediately what they were looking at. By the opening week of August, reporters were quietly verifying the core facts. By mid-August, the palace press office was fielding phone calls it had no idea how to handle. The damage here was unique, not simply because of the holiday itself, but because of its timing. For the prior 18 months, William had been advancing a very specific agenda inside the palace. He wanted tighter oversight over the external relationships senior royals could maintain, stricter rules around gifts and hospitality from individuals with financial ties connected to the crown, and a clear internal directive stating the monarchy could not risk another Axis-selling scandal like the ones that dismantled Prince Andrew. William had committed these new expectations to paper. His team distributed the updated guidelines to the households of all senior working royals. This framework was binding, not advisory. Camilla's office received the document. She took the trip anyway. Royal sources spoke to the Times in August and described the mood inside Kensington Palace as one of controlled fury. And if you understand how William operates, that description is far more unsettling than any open display of rage. William doesn't shout. He doesn't feed stories to the press. He doesn't sit down for interviews to present his side. He removes people from his life. He removed his own brother from the royal institution. He removed Camilla's sister from the Duchy of Cornwall payroll without making a single public comment. He forced Prince Andrew out of Royal Lodge through a process so deliberate and measured that by the time it concluded, Andrew had no options remaining. Those who know William best say the same thing consistently. When he decides something is finished, it is finished. Any formal announcement, if it comes at all, is merely administrative. So by late August, the question circulating inside palace circles wasn't whether William would respond, it was how, and how fast. But there's another detail that needs examining before we get to his reaction. Who told him? William didn't learn about this from press coverage. He found out before journalists had even begun making their first calls. Someone within the small group who knew about the trip, whether a guest, a staff member, or a contact connected to the yacht's owner, made sure the information went directly to Kensington Palace. In royal circles, that isn't just a leak. That's a deliberate warning. It means that whatever took place on that boat, at least one person present believed it was serious enough to go straight to the future king. William had an informant embedded deep in the circle, and that completely reframes everything that followed. Because it proves the scandal didn't blindside him. Someone deliberately put the information in his hands to prompt him to act, and he did. Now, let's examine the paper trail, because this is where Camilla's account really starts to break down. The Esperanza 3 is registered in Malta, carries a Maltese maritime license, and is owned through a Luxembourg-based holding company. This structure, an island registration paired with a continental holding entity, is fairly standard for high-end vessels. But it also makes financial transparency exceptionally difficult. That matters here, because no one has provided a clear answer about who actually covered the cost of Camilla's time on board. When royals accept private travel hospitality from outside individuals, they're required to declare it. There is a formal system for this. Senior royals who receive gifts, travel, or accommodation from private individuals above a certain value must report it through internal palace channels. These reports feed into annual transparency records reviewed by senior household officials. Camilla's July trip appears in none of them. The holding company that owns the Esperanza 3 is registered in Luxembourg as Verlon Capital Partners. It lists 3 directors. One is a British national who was named in a 2022 parliamentary committee report on foreign influence in UK property markets. The report did not allege criminal conduct, but it stated that his firm's lobbying activities around heritage land decisions warranted closer examination. Heritage land decisions are precisely where royal influence carries genuine weight. The King's Foundation, which Charles built over decades and which Camilla is publicly associated with, participates in exactly these types of determinations. It isn't definitive proof of misconduct, but it is material. That position landed extremely poorly inside Kensington Palace. The phrase private travel is a personal matter holds up fine when a royal funds a holiday themselves with no external financial entanglements. It does not hold up when the travel is hosted by someone whose company has a documented financial relationship with royal charities. At that point, it becomes exactly the kind of conflict of interest the palace's own rules were designed to prevent. William's office challenged Camilla's response within days. A source described this as direct, meaning it wasn't softened by diplomatic framing or routed through intermediaries. The message conveyed that treating this as a private matter was unacceptable and demanded a full accounting of the trip's financing be delivered to the king's senior officials without delay. As of the time of this report, that information still had not been provided. And to complicate matters further, this wasn't a first offense. 3 palace sources confirmed to 2 separate publications that Camilla had previously accepted hospitality from the same yacht owner. It occurred during a long weekend in the summer of 2023. That trip was also kept under wraps and absent from transparency records. One senior official noticed the earlier trip at the time. A quiet conversation followed. Nothing was formally documented, and the matter was buried. William didn't know about it then. He knows about it now. This changes the entire picture. What initially appeared to be a single lapse is now a pattern. That pattern was flagged once and disregarded, and the same yacht owner hosted Camilla again in 2025. 2 years later, after making financial contributions to royal structures in the interim, the pivotal document for William's team wasn't the port log. It was the charity accounts, which cross-referenced a £40,000 donation from Verlon Capital Partners against the dates of both yacht trips. They then compared it against 2024 planning applications submitted by a branch of the same holding company for a heritage site in Somerset. The application was rejected, but it had been reviewed by a body that included royal-appointed advisors. No one is claiming Camilla intervened to shape the outcome, but the appearance of a close relationship with a businessman seeking decisions from bodies connected to her network is precisely what the palace had pledged to eliminate. By late August, William's team understood this was no longer simply a story about a yacht. It was a failure of palace governance, and that put everyone facing a question no one inside the institution wanted to raise openly. Did Charles know? The meeting that shifted everything took place on a Tuesday. In the first week of September 2025, it was convened at Kensington Palace rather than Buckingham Palace, and the choice of venue carries significant weight. William, selecting his own residence instead of the King's house, sends a message before anyone has spoken a word. 3 senior advisors attended: William's private secretary, his communications secretary, and 1 official from the King's household who had been ordered to attend, not invited. Ordered is the precise word. and no one in the room missed what that distinction meant. William arrived with a physical folder of printed documents rather than a digital presentation. Inside were charity financial statements, port logs, lobbying disclosures dating from 2022, and a single-page summary of the 2023 trip, the earlier journey that had been quietly flagged and then quietly buried by an official who should have escalated the information. He set the folder on the table and left it there. He didn't narrate the contents or walk anyone through the pages. He simply said, "I need to know who saw this in 2023, and decided it didn't need to go any further. The official from the king's household, a man with more than 15 years of palace experience, could not give a clear answer. He was aware the earlier trip had been flagged, but he couldn't identify who had chosen to keep it off the official record. That absence of clarity did not satisfy William, and he made his dissatisfaction unmistakable. According to a source with direct knowledge of the meeting, what followed wasn't a confrontation. It was quieter than that, and more uncomfortable. William worked through the paper trail methodically. The first trip, the financial donation, the property planning application. The second trip, he laid them out in chronological order and asked a straightforward question. At what point was my father informed? The answer was complicated. Charles had been told about the July trip, but only in passing, not as a formal disclosure. He knew the way a husband knows his wife is going away for a break, the approximate destination, rough dates, that she was traveling with friends. He had not been told who owned the yacht. He didn't know about the Luxembourg holding company, the lobbying history, or the donation. Whether he thought to ask is a separate question, and one no one in the room was prepared to address directly. William was quiet for a moment before observing that the king hadn't been properly informed, because the system had failed to protect what mattered. He then made 3 specific demands. First, a full written disclosure covering both trips, delivered to the king's principal private secretary within 7 days. Second, a complete review of Camilla's patronages to identify any links to outside donors. Third, an immediate halt to all contact between Camilla's household and the yacht owner. Camilla objected to the third demand through Charles. The king called William the following day, arguing that Camilla had no intention to deceive and that a formal review would only end up in the press. William responded directly, noting the story was already public and the palace could either take control of the situation or be overtaken by it. Charles didn't concede, but he didn't instruct William to stand down either. By the week's end, Camilla's office had submitted a partial disclosure which William's team immediately rejected as insufficient. That formal rejection of a queen consort's office by a future king has no modern parallel. A standoff followed, with Camilla's office providing only the bare minimum. The standoff broke abruptly when a new piece of information emerged from within the palace. One of the yacht guests had held an unlogged meeting in London with a member of Camilla's patronage advisory board just 6 weeks before the trip. There is a photograph from September 12, 2025, showing Charles arriving at a film premiere in London entirely alone. Camilla had been listed on the original schedule but did not appear that evening. The stated reason was a scheduling conflict, with no additional detail. Royal correspondents clocked the change and moved on, and most observers gave it little thought. Inside the palace, however, that absence was not a scheduling conflict. It was the first publicly visible sign that something had changed in how Camilla's commitments were being managed and who was now making those decisions. Charles has been undergoing cancer treatment since February 2024. He has not addressed the specifics publicly beyond a brief statement at the time of diagnosis. What is known, through palace sources and medical correspondence, is that his treatment schedule has required significant changes to his working pattern. Engagements have been reduced, international travel has been curtailed, and there are days when he simply cannot be in meetings. That physical reality has quietly altered the balance of power inside the palace in ways no formal announcement has ever acknowledged. When the king is unavailable to chair a discussion, someone else chairs it. When he can't review a document, someone else reviews it. Through 2024 and into 2025, that person with increasing regularity has been William. This isn't a coup or a forced transition. It is simply what happens in any institution when the person at the top is managing a serious illness and has a capable deputy, both willing and ready to absorb the responsibilities. But it does mean that by the time the yacht scandal broke, Charles's capacity to intervene on Camilla's behalf was already more constrained than it had been 2 years prior, not because he lacked authority, but because day-to-day institutional management had been gravitating toward William for months. Everyone inside the palace understood this. The phone call Charles made to William after the first meeting, the one in which he argued the review risked becoming an even larger public story, was genuinely painful. Charles doesn't find conflict with his son easy. Their relationship was rebuilt carefully over years following the worst of the fallout from the Diana era, and he has invested meaningfully in it. He also loves Camilla deeply. He spent 30 years absorbing public criticism for that relationship and married her when doing so carried real institutional risk. His commitment to her is beyond question. So when William told him that Camilla's partial disclosure was unacceptable and that the review would continue, Charles pushed back again. He reportedly told William that Camilla had given him her word. There was nothing in the 2023 trip requiring further attention. William told his father plainly that her word did not align with the documentation. That exchange captures exactly where authority actually sits right now. A son telling his father, the reigning monarch, that a personal assurance from the king's own wife is insufficient evidence. And the king, not being positioned to close that conversation with a firm refusal. Charles requested more time. William gave him 72 hours. Those hours were among the most tense the household had experienced. Charles spoke to Camilla. Camilla consulted her advisors. Her advisors engaged palace lawyers. At some point, the question of what precisely happened at the 2023 meeting between the yacht guest and the patronage board member was put to Camilla directly. Her answer was that she had not been present and had not known the meeting took place. That may be entirely accurate, but it produced a new problem. If she wasn't aware, it meant someone within her own team had arranged a meeting between one of her patronage advisors and a man who would later host her on a yacht without informing her. Either her staff was managing her behind her back, or the meeting simply wasn't considered important enough to bring to her attention. Neither explanation made the position easier for Charles to defend. By the end of those 72 hours, Charles arrived at the position no husband wants to reach. He could not dispute William's factual case. The documents existed, and the meeting had occurred. He could not independently verify Camilla's account because the relevant staff member had given only a partial explanation, and he could not ask William to abandon the review without openly contradicting the institutional reform agenda he had himself publicly championed. He called William on Thursday evening. The conversation was shorter than the first. He told William to proceed with the review, asked that Camilla be treated with dignity throughout, and requested that nothing be made public without his prior awareness. William agreed to the latter two conditions. The review was already underway before the call concluded, which Charles couldn't bring himself to say, but which every senior official understood. He had just lost the ability to shield her. The space where his protection once operated had quietly closed in on him. While he was focused on staying well enough to keep working, Camilla had constructed her security inside this institution on Charles's capacity to defend her. That defense had just developed a fracture too wide to repair. So what does removal actually look like in practice? In royal terms, Camilla's autumn schedule, as originally drafted by her household, in July 2025, included 14 solo engagements running from October through December. These covered patronage visits, charity dinners, the opening of a hospital in Cardiff, 2 literary events supporting her reading initiative, and a keynote address at a women's leadership conference in Edinburgh. By the end of September, 6 of those engagements had been quietly reassigned. They weren't cancelled, they were handed to a different royal for the same date and occasion. The organizations involved were told the change was due to scheduling pressures, with no further explanation provided. No one pressed publicly, because that isn't how you preserve a relationship with the palace. But royal correspondents and Camilla's own staff noticed immediately. This is how displacement unfolds inside a royal institution. It doesn't arrive with a press statement or a dramatic confrontation. It arrives through a diary where engagements grow fewer. Briefings stop landing in your inbox, and meetings take place without you. The machinery of royal life runs entirely on access to information, to events, to decisions. When that access influence contracts with it, staff quickly recognize that their professional futures are no longer tied to your office. And the realignment is complete without a single word ever being spoken aloud. William had no need to issue a public statement about Camilla. The staffing changes came in 2 phases. In early October, 2 senior members of Camilla's team, a deputy private secretary and a senior communications advisor, were told their positions were being restructured as part of a palace efficiency initiative. Both were placed in alternative roles within the broader royal household, and neither position was refilled. The second phase was quieter, involving the reassignment of 3 junior staff members by the end of October. Camilla's dedicated team contracted from 11 members at the start of 2025 to just 7 by November. Simultaneously, her access to information was narrowed. Senior royals receive regular private briefings on foreign affairs, domestic politics, and institutional matters. Camilla had received a broad selection of these since the coronation. But from October onward, her distribution list was tightened. Foreign policy briefings and unrelated institutional materials ceased entirely. She was shifted from receiving information as a standing entitlement to a strict need-to-know arrangement. Kate's role in this transition has been unmistakable. She absorbed the Edinburgh Women's Leadership Conference and 2 of the charity dinners originally assigned to Camilla. Kate's office confirmed her attendance within a week of these reassignments, suggesting her team had been informed the slots were available before Camilla's office had finished processing the change. This deliberate repositioning allowed Kate to step into territory Camilla once held, providing continuity for the organizations involved. One final detail from late October illustrates how complete this shift has been. William and Kate spent a weekend with Charles at Highgrove House. his private country residence in Gloucestershire. Camilla remained at Clarence House in London. Palace sources described it simply as an informal family gathering. The fact that Charles, William, and Kate were together without Camilla was closely observed within the institution. Camilla still holds her title and appears at official functions beside Charles. On paper, she remains queen consort. Yet her diary is thinner, her team is smaller, her briefings are restricted, and her engagements are being filled by someone else. You don't need a formal decree to diminish someone's position in this world. You simply rearrange everything around them until they can feel the difference. And she feels it. In November 2025, William delivered a private address to a group of senior civil servants engaged in public sector management reform. The event was closed to the press and no transcript was released. But two attendees later described the session to journalists. What they recounted was not the careful, measured language people typically associate with a future king protecting his image. William told the room directly that institutions which shield individuals at the cost of their own integrity do not endure. He didn't point to anything specific. He didn't name anyone. He didn't need to. Everyone present already understood precisely what had been unfolding inside the palace over the previous 3 months. To appreciate why his reform agenda isn't merely theoretical, it's worth examining what William actually controls today. The Duchy of Cornwall generates approximately £30 million annually and spans 135,000 acres across England. The Isles of Scilly, and significant financial holdings. William has managed this substantial estate since September 2022. When Charles became king, in under 4 years, he has replaced outside contractors, restructured the management team, and terminated arrangements that depended on personal trust rather than written agreements. That last point is critical. Undocumented arrangements built on personal trust are exactly what played out on that yacht. William didn't arrive at his rigid view on governance by accident. He developed it through years of running a billion-pound estate, and he demonstrated it worked there before applying it to Camilla. The Royal Foundation illustrates his thinking precisely. It has a chief executive, a board, published annual accounts, and defined objectives. When a program fails to perform, it gets cut. One former advisor described William as someone who runs the organization like a person who has been burned by informality before, and views documentation as the only reliable safeguard. Everything is on the record and subject to review. This isn't a personality trait. It's a system constructed after watching his own family repeatedly wound itself through informal, unrecorded arrangements. William has been explicit about the kind of monarchy he intends to lead. Fewer working royals, tighter controls over who represents the crown, and zero tolerance for external financial relationships that create the appearance of conflicts of interest. The yacht scandal simply supplied the justification and momentum to accelerate changes already in motion. The consolidation of working royals is already well underway. Andrew and Harry are gone. Extended family members who once handled regional engagements have been quietly wound down. The public face of the monarchy is now essentially William, Kate, Charles, and Anne, with reduced workloads across the board. This smaller group is far easier to govern. Fewer risks, fewer informal entanglements, fewer undisclosed trips. Kate's position within this emerging structure has evolved considerably. She returned to full public duties in early 2025, following her cancer treatment, and moved quickly into a demanding schedule. Her office now handles major coordination functions, and she participates in strategic discussions that would not traditionally have included the Princess of Wales. One source described her as a co-strategist rather than a supporting partner. William trusts her judgment above everyone else's, making her the second most powerful figure in the institution. Against this backdrop, Camilla's diminished role isn't simply a temporary consequence of the yacht affair. The monarchy William is constructing has a new center of gravity, and she is not part of it. The engagements transferred to Kate are not returning. The reductions to Camilla's team will not be reversed. That leaves one major unresolved question that palace officials step around carefully. When Charles dies, Camilla will become the Queen Dowager. She retained her title and a residence, but major estates like Sandringham and Balmoral will transfer to William. The institutional support she depends on exists because Charles is king. When that changes, her circumstances will rest entirely on William's willingness to be generous. Given everything that has happened, there is little reason to expect much. Camilla still holds her title. She still walks beside Charles at state occasions, but the diary is thinner, the staff is fewer, and the woman filling her spaces is Kate. 3 questions no one inside that palace is willing to answer right now. Did Camilla genuinely not grasp the risk she was taking? Is William right to move this decisively? Or is he engineering a monarchy so tightly controlled it leaves no room for human fallibility? And when Charles is gone, will William extend the generosity that Camilla will desperately need from a man whose mother she helped to destroy?